turn on the record.
Okay, then, yeah, I can do it on my phone, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get an iPad. Give me 1 second. I'll be right
Yeah,
back.
no problem,
Okay?
David. No problem.
Actually, if you're recording and I do something on my screen, will you see it?
You should be able to do share screen. Let me check.
okay.
I've never actually hosted one before. I've been in many, but not
Here it is.
hosted.
Share screen. Share screen.
All right, excellent. You should be able to share your screen then.
Wait, this meeting. Okay, first I have to acknowledge that it's being recorded. Host disabled, participant share screen.
Hang on.
Screen
Then
sharing.
I need to go over here and I think I need to. If I make you the host, I think that should allow
Yeah,
you.
if you make
then
me
to,
the host, I'll be able to share the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just doing something on my Mylio. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to there's Zoom and Zoom. No, that's not what I want. I want this one. And now if I go here, I'll say share screen. And then I'm gonna say this one. Okay, you should now see my Mylio.
There we are. Yes, I can see it.
So we're in that, if we go into 2021, of course, now that I'm giving a demo, it's going to be really slow. I don't know why that
Oh
is.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
I might end up restarting it or something like that.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Whoops, let's do this. Okay, so, okay, normally it's instantaneous. I'm really sorry about how slow it is.
Yeah, well,
I
that's okay,
really
yes.
will restart it if it continues being slow like this, but
There
okay,
we
there's a view of a month. And I didn't take pictures every day that month.
No, I can see.
And then there's a picture of a year, and this year is incomplete, but if we scroll, we'll see other years that are more complete. And you can see that there are like events here. So that's like, the events of my lifetime. But if I wanted to go back to 1923, I really don't want to do it like a month or a year at a time. So now I'm in that decades view that I was telling you about. So if I start scrolling back, okay, now we're going back. And at this point, we're in the 60s and we're in the 50s, and people are wondering how old I really am, because if this is my life, how could we be going back into the 30s and the 40s and the 20s? Because it's also my mother's life and, my father's life and so on. So now, why do I bring this up? So people drowning in photos, these are all photos that I have. And now here's an interesting one. So I was born in 1952. And you can see there's an event there that says David Born, because that's my name, David. And if I click in that event, there's a picture of my mother and my father and me. And of course, it's obvious which one is me. Okay, so here's an interesting question. Do you have a picture of yourself when you were born?
My mother has one of the classic, like early 60s photo of me naked laying on a sort of sheepskin rug. Face down.
She has it.
Yes.
So when I ask people if they have a picture of themselves when they were born or as a baby, people sort of break into four categories. About a quarter of the people, nobody says the picture doesn't exist. About a quarter of the people say, yeah, the picture is somewhere. My parents have it, or it's in an album, or it's in a box, and I could go look for it. Not sure if I could really find it. That's a quarter of the people. And then there's another quarter of the people who will say, oh yeah, I eventually got all those pictures scanned. So that way, and I backed them up. So if there's a fire, I won't lose them. And it's on a disk. It doesn't mean I can find them, right?
Yep.
So, and then another quarter will say, it's on a disk, it's all organized, but it's on a computer in my home office. And, like we're at a restaurant, so I still can't show it to you. Right? I mean, we're now at 3/4 of the people. And then the last quarter will say, well, it's here. It's pretty rare to say they can find it right away. And then a few people, like I'd be one of them, will say, oh yeah, let me show you that picture. Let me show you the picture from, like, we were talking about how I would remember when I left Microsoft. So if we start going forward from here, you can see events, we're now, okay, now we're in the current century. And if we go to 2000 and 8, there it is. My cursor's on Bill goodbye. So that's a goodbye party for Bill. So I was wrong. I didn't leave in 2010. I left in 2009, a year after. So this is a picture from that party. So here, here's what we're about. Like, there are a lot of different kinds of people who use Mylio. And, you could think of Mylio as a digital asset manager. There are a lot of people in your audience who know what a digital asset manager is and would be excited to think that there's one that ordinary people could use. I really dislike that term because it implies that it's aimed at professionals. And we do have professionals who use Mylio. One of the things that's really cool about the product is it scales. So we have no trouble at all with 1 million pictures. And we actually have a few users with 3 and 5 and even 6 million pictures. And the product works really well. But we also have, like, for instance, one of my favorite customer conversations was with a plumber in Holland. And, I like to just talk to kind of random customers every so often, like regularly. And he has about 20,000 pictures. It's a far cry from 1 million. But, if I gave you 20,000 pictures, if they were in physical form, that's a lot of boxes of pictures. Organizing those pictures would be a big job. Like, it's not a day or a week or a month. It's like a huge job, even if you have something to help you. So, I'm talking to him about Mylio, and I suddenly realized that he's a premium subscriber. Like, he's at the high end. He's at a level in our subscription hierarchy that doesn't even exist anymore. And I say to him, why are you giving us $250 a year? And he said, David, you don't understand. Pictures never go away. And they're one of the few things that only become more valuable with time. So my picture library is only growing. And he said, so here's my problem. First of all, I have an iPhone and my wife has an Android phone and I want to stay married. So right away I have a problem because, and he said, I use a Mac and she uses a Windows machine. And so we need to be able to support all those different platforms. And Mylio does a brilliant job of that. He said, secondly, I love the fact that you store everything in the file system. He said, I'm not sure that anything will be around forever. Like, will Google be here in 100 years? Probably.
Well, that is very true, David.
Yeah,
very true.
Kodak is not here anymore. And at one time, the stock that you recommended to widows and orphans was Kodak because they would never go away. So the one thing that I'm sure is true is if all of your pictures are in files and folders, one way or another, you'll be able to work with them. So he said, I love the fact that that's how Mylio works. And then here's the really other interesting part about Mylio is, so I have all my pictures and all my computers, all my phones and all my tablets. Okay, so let's just geek out for a couple of minutes. How could that be? I have 600,000 pictures. So let's talk about two different things. Let's first of all talk about my originals, and then let's talk about all the devices that can't possibly hold originals because they're too big. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's very, very apt, David.
Okay.
Very apt.
So the thing with the originals is you want to make sure you're not going to lose them. And what Mylio does is, so we ask you to identify some number of machines that have enough storage for all your originals. We call those vaults. It's not a security thing. It's just, this machine is a vault because it has enough space for all my originals.
I don't know, prime library, I guess you might call it. Yeah.
What would you call it?
Like a prime library, a master.
Yeah, it's a prime library. It's a prime library. That's another way to put it. And we recommend that you have 2 or 3 of those, like, 2 at home and 1 somewhere else. Now, the other thing about Mylio that's really unique is we're cloud agnostic. So what does that mean? In my case, I choose to not have my pictures in the cloud for a variety of reasons: performance, security, privacy. So I have 2 vaults at home and 2 vaults at the office, and Mylio keeps them in sync automatically. I spend 0 minutes per month on backup, and I'm not worried that something is going to happen to my office and my home at the same time. So that's what we do with originals. But
well, as we like to say on Essential Apple, David, if that happens, you've probably got far bigger things to worry about than the loss of your photographs.
Exactly. Okay, so Mylio has these really unique, we call them previews. Sometimes we call them optimized images.
Mm.
They're very small, but so small means they're under a megabyte, which means that on a 1 terabyte iPad, which is, that's pretty normal these days. You can even buy 2 terabyte iPads. I can have all 600,000 of my pictures, and it takes less than half the storage of the iPad. Okay, but that's not the unique part. The unique part is, despite how small they are indistinguishable from the original on a Retina class display.
Okay.
So if I'm sitting with you on an airplane or in a restaurant and we have no internet connection, and I want to show you that picture of when I was born, or the picture from the goodbye party, or the picture from my trip to Peru, or, like any picture I want, it's all there on my phone, even if I put the phone into airplane mode, and you won't be able to tell that you aren't looking at the original.
No. So what you're saying is what you're storing on the individual devices is, how would I call it? Yeah, an optimized image. So good enough to display.
But nobody else's optimized images are indistinguishable. But I'm going to go farther.
No.
They're not just indistinguishable, they're editable.
Wow. Now that's an interesting piece.
Yeah. So when I'm sitting on that airplane and the internet connection, either there isn't one or it's so slow that there might as well not be one, it doesn't matter. Like, okay, this is my opportunity to work in some of my pictures. I can organize them. I can, this one's overexposed. I want to crop this one. And when the plane lands, the devices all talk to each other. The first chance it gets, that device will connect with the internet, and all the changes will flow to all my other machines. Okay, so here's the last unique thing about the optimized images.
So let me just ask you one question there, David.
Yeah.
If you're applying those, let's call them filter layers, because effectively that's what changes usually are.
Yeah.
To one of your optimized images, say on your phone on this flight, when it flows back to your other vaults, does it also apply that to the original photograph?
Bingo.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying is because they're effectively filter layers, it can apply the same change to the original high resolution image.
Yeah, it's non-destructive editing. And then the last thing we do, which turns out to be quite difficult because we also work with raw images, is we preserve color fidelity. So let's say that, you're doing something, somebody's having a party and you're making, I don't know, a book for them or a poster as a gift, and you're doing the work on an airplane. And, we even have brushes. So you make some adjustments, you crop, maybe in some places you do this, you do that. And then you get back and you're on your vault where you have full-sized originals. And when it comes to doing big prints or books, you really do want the full-sized original. When you look at it, it's going to look the same. You don't have to worry about that. So that's really a big deal. Okay, so now we have this situation where all of a sudden I can have all my pictures everywhere all the time. I don't have to think about it, like my library, and I can work on the pictures whenever I want. And then you've already seen that we can organize them into this really beautiful calendar, which has day, month, year, and decade view. And the calendar is also beautiful because you see all these pictures that are, key points from that particular year. So, but sometimes I want to look at things on a map. So here's all the places I've been. And if I sort of, I grew up in Toronto. So if I go to Toronto and zoom in, then I start to see more detail. And, these are places in Toronto, like my sister's house, my mother's house, and like that. So that we have this really beautiful map view. And then I can do things like, okay, let's do this. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to go up here. Sorry. Sometimes even I do the wrong thing. Nope, that's not what I want to do.
With great power comes a level of complexity. It's, unavoidable, David. Okay.
Okay, so I typed in my sister's name and it filtered the map to show me all the places in which there are pictures with her in the picture.
Okay. Excellent.
Okay, so that's pretty cool as well. So it's not just a map, it's actually an active way of organizing your pictures. So let's cancel that. And then there's, we talked about the, let's close out the filter bar. We talked about the now infamous folder view. So this is a folder, but if we back up, these are all my folders. Okay, so I want to, as I talk about folders, I'm going to say one other thing, and then I'm going to back out and go to the big picture again. So if we go back here in history, because so far we've been talking about pictures, so that's photos, but it's also videos. So, but
Of
there's
course.
one other thing that we all have a lot of information about. So my father was killed in a plane crash in 1966. So for me, 1966, if you're on the website and you're looking at this, that was the key event of the year, one of the key events in my life. And if I click in that event, here's what we see. We see some clips from the web, newspaper headlines. We see some pictures, but there wasn't much to take pictures of. And then we see this thing here. I'm going to zoom in on it. So this is a PDF. What's this PDF doing in a collection of photos? Okay, this is the trip report written by the engineer, dispatched to the craft site by what used to be called BOAC.
Yep.
Okay, and he decided to send that trip report, which has the right title and date and everything on it, to as many families of survivors as he could find. So my sister got it, and she sent it to me as an attachment, and I put it into Mylio. And it just automatically appeared in this calendar event. And then this is as important a memory as the pictures. And if I was sitting on a plane, even a plane with no internet connection, I could click on it and I'd be reading the trip report. So, okay, that's pretty interesting. So let's go back into folder view, because I'm going to talk about what kinds of things can you have in folders. So for example, what's my blood type?
Can I ask you one question there, David?
Yeah.
Does Mylio support like smart folders, so you can say create a folder that contain pictures of horses, for example?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, that's fine. Just, that's the sort of thing that my listeners are interested in.
Yeah, no, we get asked about that a lot, but we OCR everything. So if you take a picture of a restaurant that has a sign in the front, and then you want to find out the restaurant by name, you'll be able to find it, even though you didn't do any keywording. So for example, I want to know my blood type. I should remember my blood type, but even though I do this in demos all the time, I still don't remember it. But if I type in Red Cross, there's my Red Cross card.
There we go. Yep.
So, driver's license, passport, credit cards. Like one time I was on a beach and I wanted to get something from a restaurant. I didn't have my wallet, but I had my credit card right there. So, I could have also, if they took it, used Google Pay or Apple Pay, but I had it. Now, here's another thing. So I do a lot of reading, and then I'm going to come back to photos. So what happens is that I can never keep up with my reading, like technical papers and just things I'm interested in. So what I used to do was I would, like if there was a magazine article I liked, I would tear it out of the magazine, staple the pages together and put it in a bag. Yeah. And then when I went on a plane trip, I'd go through the reading pile and I'd measure the success of the plane trip by how much lighter the bag was at the end of the trip versus the beginning of the trip. Okay, then around 2010, Apple announced the iPad and Dropbox came into existence. So I started putting articles into my Dropbox. The problem is that when I'd get on the airplane, so first of all, Dropbox will replicate folders to your computer. It doesn't replicate to your iPad. It puts pointers there, links.
Right, yeah.
When you get on that airplane, if there's no internet connection or it's too slow, you can't read what you put in there. So now I put everything in Mylio. And then here's the other thing. It looks beautiful. These are the papers in my reading pile.
Very nice.
Okay, now I'm going to show you one more thing. And if we were doing this demo in person, I'd do it both ways. It somehow doesn't come across the same in a blog, but I'm going to do a search, and here's the point. So everything you've seen, all the documents, the Red Cross card, all the photographs, there are videos in there as well. I didn't show one. They're all on my computer, my tablet, my phone, and on my computer, they're in the file system. Like I could leave Mylio, go to the file system, they'd all be there. So I'm going to look for a paper about a Google database called Spanner.
Okay.
If I do
And
a search for that.
By the way, I don't want to break your flow, David, but I think that's really important that you make that clear, because this is one of the things that a lot of people find troublesome with Lightroom or various other photo libraries, is that they want to concatenate all your pictures into their database. And that's all very well, unless A, something goes wrong, or B, you want to change to another system. And a lot of the people who listen to Essential Apple and or interact on our Slack say they would prefer a system where the originals live in a file structure, on their hard drive, and that the app manages the library. So I think that's, that's very important. It's an important point. Very important for some of our listeners.
Yeah, we're the last man standing, which I guess is a British expression. We're the last man standing that honors and respects the file system.
Excellent.
So the other reason that you want the file system is Lightroom Classic uses the file system, but the handwriting's on the wall. Adobe really wants you to go to Lightroom Creative Cloud, and it doesn't use the file system. It's not a choice. It's one of the complaints people have. So everything is in the Adobe black box or the Google black box or the Apple black box. And guess what products or tools work with that black box? In the case of Adobe, it's Adobe products and tools. So if I want to use, I like using a wide variety of tools. I might want to use Affinity. I might want to use PT GUI for panoramas. I also, because I have documents in here, I might want to use Word or Excel or PowerPoint. I might want to use Photoshop. I might want to use DxO. And if it's in the file system, I can use whatever I want. But if it's in a black box, somebody's told me what I can use, and that sort of rubs me the wrong way.
That's fine.
Okay, so
That's
here
excellent.
it is. It's in the file system. So that means I have a file system with 600,000 files and a lot of folders. Actually, I can tell you exactly how many folders. Let's go up a level. So I have a file system with, if you look up here, it's a bit hard to read, 599,753 items. And then there's some more over on the left in two other folders. So it probably is 600,000. And I have, isn't that interesting? It's all eights, if I'm reading it correctly, 8,888 folders. If I do a search for Spanner, now it happens in this case, Spanner, the word is in the title is in the file name. So that search won't look inside the document, which the Mylio search will, but that search on an M1 Mac with SSD storage or on a Windows machine, let's say a Spectre or, any of the fastest machines, a Dell XPS, that search will take 30 to 45 seconds, which is a long time. It could take longer, but that's the minimum. When I do any of those searches, like when I did the Red Cross search, we didn't bother looking at how fast it was. And the reason we didn't is because you can't time it. It's always under half a second.
Excellent.
When I did that filter, all the pictures with my sister in it, under half a second. Looking up this paper, under half a second. Now this is folder view, but if I click over here and say, show me all the items. So here are all the items that have Spanner in them somewhere. Documents and images, so now I have everything. I have it in the file system where I can work with it outside of Mylio, and I have it in a place where I can get it really quickly. So let me kind of bring this first part to a close with two interesting stories. Okay, let me say one last thing. Where does Mylio fit in? So it fits in two ways. First of all, You were talking at the beginning, I asked about your audience and you said you don't know if you have any professionals in your audience. And we have users who are professional photographers. It's not a target for us. Like, we love them, but it's not a target. So I think the world kind of breaks into three broad categories. And I think your users are all in the middle category. The bottom category, which is about 2 billion people, that's a lot of people, are people who take photos. Like these days, everybody takes photos, mostly not with cameras, mostly with phones, but everybody takes photos with their phones. The photos could be a picture of the menu of the restaurant. It could be a price tag, but they also like snapshots, things, memories. People take photos. And most people don't want to lose their photos. They prefer to have their photos be safe, and they want to be able to find them, but they don't want to spend any time organizing their photos in any way. It's just not something they're interested in doing. They have other things to do in their life.
Yeah, they
So
have
those-
they have what I used to call the shoebox principle, which is
Yeah.
what most of our grandparents had. They would have maybe an album with, special photographs in. All the rest went in a shoebox.
Right. That is so Google and Apple have revolutionized the shoebox. It's the best shoebox you could ever have. You just put your pictures in there. Probably Apple and Google are going to be around for a long time. They make sure that they have lots of copies of your pictures so it can't be lost. They do really good face recognition, really good object recognition, and they have albums. And so if you don't want to spend any time at all in your pictures, which is the majority of the market, that's where you should go. You're not going to use Mylio. Then at the top, so let's say that's 2 billion. At the top of the market is 2 million users. It's a much smaller number. It's still a healthy number. These are the Lightroom users and some similar products. So these users know what gradient filters are. They know what hierarchical keywords are. And they want to spend a lot of time working on their pictures, organizing them and working on them. So in between the 2 million and the 2 billion, we think there's probably about 200 million users who want to spend some time. They want to have some degree of control over their pictures.
I'd say you're underestimating there, David.
Well,
I would say, I think you're probably right. There's probably 2 billion users who are the people who use the shoebox principle.
yeah.
And as you say, Apple, Google, Amazon, wherever you want to chuck your pictures, do a reasonably good job of surfacing whatever you're looking for. And at the higher end, I would say you're still underestimating, because I know that there are quite a lot of users who are, at least I know we're a self-selecting group, but there's quite a lot of people in the Essential Apple Slack group who would not class themselves as professional photographers, but do spend quite a lot of time, keywording and worrying about, managing their assets.
That's our user base.
Yeah. So,
Okay, so
I would say 200 million. I think you're way under there, David.
Okay, I'd be happy to be under. I'm just picking numbers to begin with,
yeah,
too.
I mean, I mean, you say there's 2 billion people who really just chuck the stuff in a shoebox and let Apple or whatever sort it for them.
Yeah.
I would have said the user base you're attacking is probably in the 750 million to 1 billion. You want my honest guess?
Even better. And a lot of those people find Lightroom either too complicated or more than they need.
Exactly.
So that's our audience. So I'm going to tell you sort of 2 stories that go with that. One kind of leads to the other. So another thing we do that nobody else does is we have spent a lot of time thinking about old pictures. So like, what's an old picture? Like, my mother died about, a year and a half ago.
Okay.
More. But about 10 years before she died, I was at her house and she had this shelf, this low shelf, like a credenza with the TV on it. She had a little den and there were a bunch of photo albums underneath. typical. And I said, can I take them home and scan them? So I took a pile, the size of the pile was what I could carry. So, it's like one arm, one hand on the bottom, another hand on the
Yeah.
top, a stack of albums. That turned out to be 14,000 pictures.
Wow. That's a lot of
Yeah.
pictures.
It's a lot of pictures. So a friend of mine, and then the problem is with these pictures, now you scan them all, and there are like two ways to scan them. There's a way that doesn't work. If you start to scan them with your phone, you'll give up within half an hour. If you use a normal flatbed scanner, you'll give up in 10 minutes. It's just too tedious. So you either can send them out to be scanned, or and this is a company that we hope to work with soon, is Epson makes this amazing device called the Fast Photo Scanner. And it's all about the mechanics. You put in a pile of photos and it scans them 1 per second. So
Excellent.
if you have 4x6s, 5x7s, and 8x10s, you can go through thousands of them in a relatively short period of time, and it does a brilliant job. Okay, however you did it, whether you sent them away or did it yourself, now you have, okay, so here's an example. A friend of mine decided he wanted to do a gift for his wife's 60th birthday, and they had a lot of old pictures, not only their own, but, grandparents and parents, like typical, right? So he paid to have them scanned, and he actually went out of his way to find somebody who would scan them locally because he was unwilling to ship them. Like he said, if these pictures get lost by FedEx, I
Yep.
can never get them back.
You
So
never
he
get
took
them
them
back.
in
Exactly.
personally, and so he ended up with the disc with 50,000 pictures on it. Believe me, it's
Woo-hoo-hoo.
not that unusual if you go to
No, I
extended
guess not.
family.
No, I guess not. I guess not.
Okay. So then he realized, like, this is not a gift. Like what is my wife going to do with 50,000 pictures? Like, it's a burden. She might look at it for 2 seconds and then she's going to give up. So he actually went to the trouble of putting in the pictures into Google Photos and realized, so all those pictures, they're all there in one big pile. They're not in folders or anything. They're just one big pile. Maybe some of them are sort of organized by the album they came from. And they all have the same date, the date they were scanned.
Yeah.
Like, who cares when they were scanned? And if they have a geotag, it's the geotag of the place where they were scanned.
Yeah.
Who cares where they were scanned? So Google has not a single feature for dealing with that problem.
Okay.
Apple has not a single feature for dealing with that problem. Even Adobe at the high end has not a single feature for dealing with that problem. So we have a set of features. For example, we have the ability to declare that photos are undated. That's the start. And then we have fuzzy dates. So you can say, this photo was taken in the summer of 1967, or this photo was taken in July of 1984. And then we can do the same thing with geotags. That's coming. It's not quite done. And then here's the other thing. Once you start to assign those loose geotags, if you have a calendar, okay, if you're going back more than 20 years, what I'm about to say doesn't help. But if you're doing the last 20 years, we can hook up the GCal, iCal, or Outlook and pull out all of your events and then get rid of the ones that aren't associated with photos. It's like a form of smart album. So if I went on a ski trip to Lake Trois Vallées in 2014, that will show up in Mylio. I tap in the event and there are the pictures from it. So what he did is he tried Google, he tried Apple, and then he couldn't remember the name of the product. He was a colleague from Microsoft. So he looked me up and then he found Mylio and he called me up. He was so excited. He said, David, a week after I installed Mylio, I had a quarter of the pictures organized and I was able to give my wife the gift. And she said it was so beautiful because all of a sudden, he said she was crying. There was a calendar. The calendar showed her life. There were, she could look on the map and see where we went. He said it was all there. So sort of to really put a fine point on that. So I'm going to look for a particular picture here. And I'm sorry for the people who are only hearing this, but maybe they'll go to the blog and they'll find it. So quite a long time ago, we were doing a lot of work with Scott Kelby, who is the guy who wrote a lot of the original Photoshop and Lightroom books. And I told him that one of the most interesting things about Mylio, yes, it's a DAM. Yes, you can find documents and pictures really quickly. You can put them into folders. It's really, if you're running a small business, Mylio is fantastic because in a business, everything is a project and every project is a folder. And Mylio lets you share those folders with your team. So if I'm working on a project on an airplane and I create a new folder, when I land, my assistant and the rest of the people on the team will see it. But that's not personal. It's very important. And I said to Scott, those things are all important, but what you're going to find emotionally is if you put your pictures into Mylio, you're going to start discovering pictures you don't even know you had. I said, okay, no reaction. About 3 weeks later, I'm meeting with Scott in another city, and he's like super emotional, like almost in tears. And he said, David, it was what you said. I was sitting on a plane looking at pictures that I'd forgotten I had on my phone. And the only reason I could do that is because Mylio put everything everywhere, right? I couldn't have done it otherwise. And I discovered this picture I didn't even know I had. And then I had to explain to the person sitting next to me why I was crying. Okay, so the oldest memory I have of my father is him and me sitting on a beach north of Toronto. Like I must have been 5 years old. And I was sitting on a plane about 2 weeks after this experience with Scott and discovered this picture. And of course, the people who are only listening can't see it, but this is that picture I described to you. There's my father, there's me on a beach, just north of Toronto. And then I was the one who was in tears.
Yeah.
So I started by saying, go ahead. I started by saying, we're different than like other photo products. In a way, we're more than a photo product because we're a memory manager, information manager. We're not in competition with, I don't really think we're in competition with Adobe, maybe a little bit with Lightroom. We're not in competition with Google or Apple because the people who don't want to organize, that's where they're going to go. And we're certainly not in competition with like Luminar or Affinity or because we do editing, but if I want to do serious editing, I go from Mylio to Affinity or from Mylio to Luminar or Mylio to Photoshop. So we're a friend of theirs. We're the best friend of the folder system as well. But what we are trying to do is to change the way the world remembers. And that's what this is all about. So I'm hoping that your users will try Mylio. It helps you organize your pictures, helps you protect your pictures, make sure you always have them where you need them. Well, and I'd love to hear from them. My email is david@mylio.com. And if you have problems, we're very committed to helping our users. Hopefully you won't have problems, but I also like to hear, that people love it. So that's me talking.
Yeah, excellent, David. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I will put a link to the recording, the video recording in the, on the site and in the show notes. And just kind of to wrap it up.
Yeah.
David, would you like to give some of the listeners a bit of your history before you, started Mylio? Because obviously you have a big history in the industry.
I have a checkered past.
Well, that's fine. I mean, let's face it, we had Jean-Louis Gasset on, which was, to me, a huge honor and a massive, I won't say a coup, but, he was very gracious. I simply tagged him on Twitter and said, Jean-Louis, would you come on our tiny little podcast? And he very graciously agreed and came on and talked about, his life in Apple and technology, which was fabulous. And I'm very pleased to have, been able to have you on, David. But just tell people some of your checkered past and, just so they get a feel for who you are and where you sit in the technology spectrum.
Sure. So let's start with, I was born in Israel. And my parents, my mother was, we talked about her a little, she became an engineer in the 50s, like women didn't become engineers and she did. And then my father was an engineer too. And we moved, I like to say I brought them to Toronto, but it wasn't quite like that because I was 2.5 years old. And when I went to school, I didn't speak any English because they didn't really speak English at home. It just didn't occur to them. So I thought the kids couldn't talk and they thought that I was just stupid. So I learned to read very quickly and went from not being able to read at all to reading at a 6th or 7th grade level and started didn't have a lot of friends because I couldn't really play sports and could have, but it just anyways. So
Wasn't your thing, yeah.
I read a
Join the
huge
club.
amount. I read a
Join the
huge
club,
amount.
Douglas.
So I read a huge amount of science fiction. I was reading 10 to 12 books a week. And
Oh, yeah. Join the club there as well, man.
yeah,
When I was young, my mother was a librarian. So I used to go to the library when I was kind of 9, 10, 12 years old. And in theory, I believe the library book limit was 3 books. And I used to take out 6 because my mum
yeah,
was the
exactly. The
librarian.
librarian told me I could take out as many. I would ride up in my bicycle with a basket on the front, and the librarian told me there's a limit, but it doesn't apply to you because I know you're going
Yeah.
to read them and bring them back. So however many books you can carry, you can take.
And I would take home, these 6 science fiction books, it'd be Robert Heinlein, Isaac
Yep.
Asimov, all the classics.
Larry
And,
Niven, Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, all of those. And I would devour them. Literally, I would read, a book in a day, 2 books in a day. So I
Right.
would take these 6 books home, and then, 3 days later, I'd be back at the library telling my mum, I'm done with these. I want some more.
Right. So you and me both. So we were both reading about computers almost before there were computers. And so in 1966, so this is a really strange thing because in the city that I lived in, which was a suburb of Toronto, for some reason, they decided to install a computer in the high school I went to. And it was like a mainframe because that's what there was. It had a raised floor and glass windows in the walls and an operator. And it sat there and like nobody had any use for it. Like nobody even knew what it was. If you said computer in those days, people would look at you. People knew what punched cards were, sort of. They didn't know why they existed. So I taught myself to program. And then in 1971, I wrote one of the first 3 email programs in the world. And then I started my first software company in the late 70s, and we built a thing called a TP monitor. Now it would be called an app server. I wrote probably 1 million lines of code. Then I went to 3Com, which was founded by Bob Metcalf, who invented Ethernet. We all take Ethernet for granted, but there was a guy who invented it.
Yes.
So I was employee 91. And then in 1986, I joined Microsoft, which at the time I was employee number 902. So they had less than 1,000 employees. And so oddly enough, I spent the first 4 years in a marketing job. And I'm holding myself back because every one of these stories could be 15 or 20 minutes. But
That's
I
fine.
helped convince the company to bet on Windows in the Windows Office. And so we launched that in 1990. In 1988, I stood in front of the board and said, if we did this, the company would hit $1 billion in sales. And so there was an hour's argument about the strategy and then an hour's argument about the $1 billion because the company was about $200 million a year at the time. And then the president, not the CEO, the president, a guy named John Shirley, he said, look, let's stop. By definition, no software company can be $1 billion a year because it's not even a manufactured product. But if David's strategy gets us to $400 million a year and we stop losing money on these personal apps, which was like Word, Multiplan, this was before Excel and so on, that would be great. Well, we hit the $1 billion. And then I started Microsoft Consulting, which I did for 2 years. That's a story too. And then I started the enterprise group. So the enterprise group in the beginning was me, just me. And then I ran the enterprise group for about 8 years. At the end, I had about 8,500 people working for me. The organization worked really well. And I found that I didn't really enjoy running a big organization. So then I started the small business division and bought Great Plains, which at the time, that was the largest acquisition Microsoft had ever done at over $1 billion. In those days, $1 billion acquisitions were a big deal. Now, of course, it's like nothing.
No, I know. But
and then after doing that for 2 years, Bill Gates said to me, I want you to come work beside me and be CTO. So I did that for my last 8 years there. So there you have it.
There you go. fabulous, fabulous. What an interesting history, David.
Thank you.
Very much so. Very interesting. Like I say, we had John Louis Gasset on, and he was very gracious and told us stories about being at Apple, being at B, being at Palm. It's fantastic. What I do like so very much is how people like yourselves, John Louis, people from big companies, Ashley Hewson, whoever, are quite happy to come and talk to me and my relatively small podcast and, tell us interesting stories about how things come to be, because I think it's important.
Yeah.
It's all very nice to look at the big new shiny thing, but often with more modern, how could I put it? With more recent developments, often you don't hear any of the backstory. This thing just is. And
Yep. How many readers do you have on the blog?
The blog, probably 300. The podcast itself, 400 to 500 on a regular basis. When we have special guests like you, it sometimes goes higher, especially if we, promote it. I mean, I'll put out a tweet, and, if you would retweet it to your followers, that will obviously push up the listenership. I think our highest has probably been 1,000 listens. We're not a very big podcast, but obviously the people who follow us are very dedicated technology people. So thank you very much for coming on, David, and giving us your
My
time.
pleasure. Okay,
We really appreciate it. Okay. All right, David. Thank you very much. Oh, before you go, we like to do what we call the wrap up. So please tell all the listeners where they can find your stuff around the web.
www.mylio.com. Mylio is Mylio, which you can think of as My Life is Organized. It's not really what it is, but it sort of is.
It kind of works.
www.mylio.com. And my email is david@mylio.com.
Okay. And do you have a Twitter, or do you not engage in that?
It's better to do mail. I do have a Twitter. I have to admit, I should start using it more. That's going to be one of my resolutions for the new year.
Okay. So, all right. Thank you, David. And if you want to find David's Twitter, I guess go to his website, and when he's active, he'll
My
put it on there.
Twitter is actually my full name, David Vaskevitch. So you get the challenge of spelling out the last name.
I'll put a link in the show notes, David. Don't you worry. Well,
Okay,
thank you so very much for giving up your time.
Pleasure.
It's been fabulous. We really always enjoy having guests on, and I'm sure our guests will be, our listeners will be very, very interested in your product. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Have a nice day, mate.
Okay.
All right. Bye.